Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Psych Monologues. Today is the last day of February, and I am Dr. Ray Mitsch, your host, if you hadn't guessed already. And the Psych Monologues is a podcast that explores the intersection of faith and psychology and spiritual formation. And so I just want to invite you to take a brief slice of time out of your day, whatever you're doing. Maybe you'll listen while you're doing something, but pull up a chair, get comfortable, in not necessarily that order, I suppose. Relax. And I want to talk about the issues that matter to you, particularly the things related to your spiritual journey and the questions you have about psychology and how it interfaces with that, and also just the nature of faith itself. So, where you live, what you think, how you feel about living life with others in Jesus, and particularly with yourself, which might continue to be an ongoing conversation that we can have. We're sitting at, I can throw a stone into March. We are so close, I can just sense it waiting. When I grew up in Indiana, we used to always joke about March. Here in Colorado, it's very different. It's the snowiest month of the year. But in Indiana, where I grew up in the Midwest, lots of humidity, everything else, and we always referred to March as coming in like a lion and leaving like a lamb. And here in Colorado, it's very different in that regard. But it is oftentimes nasty, and by the time we're to the end of March, we have April clearly in sight, and spring is perhaps beginning to show its evidence. So I'm sure that wasn't what you were coming for tonight, a weather lesson in the Midwest and the Mountain West. All right, so be that as it is, we are in a series where I wanted to try to tackle what spiritual formation looks like, and also what are the obstacles that come up with that. And so we have a variety of topics that come to the forefront, and some of them are ones that, like tonight, are particularly poignant for me, personal to me. Some of the other ones, hopefully they are interesting to you. We can share with both of them, really, in a lot of ways. But I've got a question for you tonight, and we'll try to loop back around and land it again when we get to the end. I'm inserting a couple new segments into the podcast just to make it interesting, I guess. At the very end, when we get to the end, I want to have a Q&A time. I occasionally will get emails from folks, and I had a question that was related to the Emptiness podcast that I had last episode. And I want to try to address that real briefly, just food for thought in the continuing conversation around emptiness and what it means. But tonight, what is the question? The question that I want to try to answer is, when you hear the word lament, what do you think of? I mean, this is not a word that is part of our everyday vocabulary at all, as a matter of fact. I don't think I've ever heard anyone say, I'm in the middle of lament. Now, we have synonyms in our conversations like sorrow and grief and loss and things like that. But this is a particularly old word. It has a lot of spiritual depth to it. And I think some of that spiritual depth certainly comes from Scripture, which I'll talk about in a second. But I want to give you some personal context as to why I bring this up and why I think this is so central to talking about spiritual formation and the spiritual journey that we're all on, including me. And this is not the kind of podcast where it's always about content and talking about important topics, which we do. But I want to talk about everyday life. Real life, not life that we create for others to consume, a life that we sit around and ask for prayer requests, and either we have the situation where somebody says, yeah, I'm good, nothing particularly to talk about, or we need to pray for fill in the blank. Currently, it's the people of Ukraine, and that's legit. It's completely legit. On the other hand, it's not anywhere near the realities and where we're living, and neither one negates the other. But what I find, and the reason I want to land on this for a little bit tonight, is just I'm in my own season of lament, and if you're familiar with the book The Shack, no matter what you might think of it, and there's plenty of opinions out there on it, I know, but there's not a conversation. There's a description that is used of the main character. His name is Mac, and he refers to the state that he's in, or maybe it was his friend. I might be conflating these things, but it is the great sadness, and there was a lot of story behind it. If you haven't read the book, I'm not going to ruin it for you. But Mac lived in this state of the great sadness. It was an ever-present reality percolating in the back of his life, and he would carry on life and do various things and accomplish various things, but the baseline was sadness, and that's exactly where I find myself right now. I have 5 or 6 different arenas that are a part of the world that I live in, not the least of which, of course, is my teaching at CCU. But I have other parts of my life that have this pall that is hanging over them. And there's sadness connected to each. I have a dear friend that got a pretty dramatic diagnosis, and the prognosis is fairly negative. It's unstated, but it's not good. And I have a father-in-law who was a father to me for most of my life, and he's getting old, and he's coming to the end of his runway. And a variety of other relationships in my life that are just really under pressure and under in distress. And I noticed something in my own self as I walk through this season of lament that I am in, that I feel a variety of messages coming my way. Now, it's not from anything anybody says at all, but the messages are get over it, get on with it, and get your crap done. And somehow I'll own it. I'm giving myself that message. And some of it is because the demands don't stop. Life doesn't stop. Things don't stop expecting things. People don't stop expecting. And it's not their problem to track the interior emotional state that I'm in. But at the same time, there's a significant emotional drains in my life right now, and I would not really have it any other way. It's just the way it is. And so I really relate with Mac. The baseline right now is the baseline of sadness. It won't last forever. It doesn't really matter whether it'll last forever. It's just there. And I don't know that there's a lot that can be detected. I can generate enough energy and movement and investment and lose myself in the job that I have. I am exceedingly fortunate to have the kind of job that I enjoy so much that I can lose myself in it, and teaching and the students and the relationships I have with them, and they give me life, and in a lot of ways they keep me young, even in the interactions that I have with them. So all of that is very much a part of the landscape that I experience when I'm doing what I do. And so I have my own season of lament. And I mentioned at the beginning that the very nature of what's talked about, even within the Bible, is that lament as a word has extremely incredible levels of depth. And just to give you an understanding of that, is that the Bible is not ashamed of lament at all. In Psalms, for example, and oftentimes I refer to the Psalms as David's journal. And I know he didn't write them all. I understand that. But in the Psalms, 60 of the 150 Psalms that we have are categorized as lament Psalms. That's 40%. There is one whole book in the Bible that's devoted to laments, and it's aptly named Lamentations. And the question comes up, why does the Bible embrace lament the way it does? And I think it's because God wants to communicate to us about being honest about our human experience. He is inviting us. I think I could actually say he's giving us permission to not settle for superficiality and a shallow way of describing what life is like for us as humans. We're not being called upon to act as if and to pretend as if suffering is not serious, or that it's an illusion, or it's no big deal, or I have all my crap together as a Christian, and because I do, it's not affecting me. No. See, we too must learn to meaningfully and honestly express the anguish of our hearts. If we are to avoid superficiality or pretense, and if we are to move into the very thing that I hear loads and loads of lip service about, authenticity, transparency, community, all of it, we are so tempted by creating an appearance of something because we want other people to believe that appearance, and we don't want to look at the appearance. And being honest in expressing a lament, which is an excruciatingly honest way to approach it, then we're exposed. We're vulnerable. We stand the chance of being seen as we are, not as we would have people to believe we are. And then what? Then what? So somebody sees me and sees me at my vulnerable, sees me at a place of struggle and uncertainty and all of that. Then what? And you know what I think the dirty little secret is? It's not about other people. It's about us seeing us. It's about that. And when people see us, we see us, and then we have a terrible choice to make. Because if they offer us grace, then what are we going to give ourselves? And I think generally, we're so uncomfortable in our own skin. And I say we, I'm so uncomfortable in my own skin a lot of the time that I want to cover it over, say I'm fine, and keep moving and just get the job done. But there is a tremendous cost that I want to sensitize y'all to by not allowing ourselves to experience lament. Now, I know that launching into a conversation like this, there are lots and lots of Christians out there that that say this is emphasizing such a negative part of the human experience. Isn't there so much more that we can praise God about and be joyful in? But that is the cost. You see, if we are not willing to walk through the valleys of our experiences, then the mountaintops don't have nearly the profoundness to them. They don't have nearly the significance because we have never allowed for or never talk about or never really walk into or through those valleys. We hide the valley so that nobody really sees it. And the worst part about it is that when we go into a valley and hide it, we are hiding ourselves, and in so doing, we end up alone. Now, I've got to say, I'm safely alone. I don't have prying eyes looking in on my struggle and my anger and my doubt and my irritation and my irritability and all of that stuff. I don't have anybody looking in on that. Therefore, what? I'm not going to experience judgment? Oops, it's too late. I've already judged me. The issue about other people's judgment isn't about them. It's just that they're articulating what I'm already thinking about myself. So there's a cost of not experiencing or allowing for lament. God has given us, if you want to put it this way, and this is a broad brushstroke, but God has given us permission to experience the hard parts of life and say and communicate and articulate our lament. In Micah, he uses the word, woe is me. In David's Psalms, he says, I am forsaken. As a matter of fact, there is a verse in Psalm 22 that Jesus quotes at the cross. And we all know it. God, God, why have you forsaken me? That is the height of lament. So the cost of covering all this over and not experiencing that and saying that's not the happiness, that's not the comfort, that's not the thing that I bargained for in life, therefore I'm not going to deal with it, and that way my life can be filled with happiness and joy and rainbows and butterflies, and people will get the impression that that's how I live life and everything will be good, right? Except that the happiness, the depth of happiness is lessened. Because I believe there is a need. We have a need for contrast. And without that contrast, our lives lack depth. And without that depth, our relationships become increasingly superficial. Comfortably superficial, I might add, but still superficial. I am a fan, I suppose you would say, of Rembrandt, particularly the more popular painting that many people have maybe on their wall, and I have one here in my office at home, and I have one in my office at school, and it is entitled The Return of the Prodigal. And interestingly enough, the story of Rembrandt's paintings, he did numerous sketches before he ever landed on his final painting, which I believe is 1660 in that area, I think, or of time. But he sketched a number of different ones, some way, way more detailed. But the thing that stands out about the picture, the painting of the prodigal is the contrast of light. And that's true for other paintings of Rembrandt's. As a matter of fact, I have another one that is right next to this one from the Prodigal, and it's called the Storm on the Lake. And it is capturing the moment when Jesus is with his disciples and there's a storm on the Sea of Galilee, and they're all scrambling to try to figure out what to do and how to wake Jesus up and in that moment, Rembrandt catches it, and with the stroke of his brush, the light and the darkness speak loudly of the profundity of that moment, and that's what contrast does. And I would suggest to you, we want deep relationships that we can be known and know other people in, then we need to invite depth. And with that requires some level of contrast. The famous spiritual formation author, I'm pretty sure it's Richard Foster. I may have his first name wrong, but he wrote the book, The Celebration of Disciplines, and he made an interesting comment. And that comment was, Christianity is flooded with celebrities. We've grown up with celebrities. I mean, now with the explosion of social media, isn't that ever the case? Even more so today, right? They're called the influencers, whatever that is. They do. But he said, we're flush with celebrities. The one thing we're missing, and the one thing Christianity needs the most of, is deep people. And I would suggest that we need to get comfortable with. I'm not saying we need to seek out and live there, but we need to figure out a way to become comfortable with lament. Because there are a variety of reasons why we avoid it. We avoid it because it's uncomfortable. Why is that a problem? And the problem is we're addicted to comfort. We define good life by comfort. No, I'm not saying I spend my days looking to be uncomfortable, but it's uncomfortable. It is. And there's all sorts of reasons for that, right? Because it's uncertain, it's unsafe, we feel vulnerable, capable of being wounded. We don't know how to get through it. Nobody's ever told us anything about this. Tonight may be the very first time you've ever heard, or today may have been the very first time you've ever heard the word lament. But we don't know how to get through it. The biggest catastrophic thought we have is once I enter into that land, I will never get out. That once I stop, once I experience it, it will never stop. And so because of all of those things that are embedded in this idea of lament and how it's kind of faded from view in our culture, we're not taught anything about it. And then when we get hijacked by it, we do the thing we know to do, and that is cover it up, cover it with all sorts of platitudes and phrases, and I'll get through it, and everything will be fine, and whatever else, whatever. And then we continue the legacy of not teaching anybody about lament is an expression of love. So what can we do? Well, I would say two things, and there's more, but I'm slowly running out of time here. Validate and articulate. That sounds very simple, right? Not to mention they both have 8 at the end. Hopefully that will stick with you a little bit more. My psychology training tells me make it easy for people to remember, and validate, articulate is certainly one of those. But validate the fact that I'm in it. See, the thing I have reflected on, even as I've been in the midst of this season of lament that I'm in, is that as I lean into it, I get this sense that if anybody saw me doing this, they would say, you're just asking for trouble. Why focus on all of that? It's just a bummer. It's just being depressed. It's just darkness. The interesting thing that Henry Nouwen once said is that we have to get comfortable with our darkness if we're going to understand the value of light and that exists within us. So I have to find some way to validate it. Maybe I have the kind of friends around me that will validate it. Not so much by saying it's okay that you're there. It's more of being patient with us in the midst of it and encouraging us just to walk the journey. And they're willing to walk with us. And as I mentioned before, the ancient Jewish tradition of sitting Shiva with somebody, allowing them to just ventilate and talk, and just by my presence and not my commitment to problem solving, just my willingness to walk with them through it is a validation of where they are. And the second thing is articulate. Shakespeare once said, essentially, grief needs to be given words. To take my grief and make it words. And so articulating it, articulating the grief we feel, the loss we feel, the helplessness and uncertainty we feel, all articulating that. And that's not in one sitting. It's not a matter of doing that. It can come out in the phrase dribs and drabs, small amounts now and again, articulating it a little bit more, because there's something remarkable that happens when I articulate what's going on inside of my heart. Not only do I validate it, but now I own it. Now it's mine. Now it's me. And now I have something to offer another. And that may be encouragement just to somebody else to hear somebody articulate it. They may not have the vocabulary for it. See, that's a lot of our problem when it comes to articulating this stuff, because we don't have a vocabulary for it. I mean, the wonder of that word lament is just the word itself carries the kind of gravity that seems to carry it along. So validate and articulate. And finally, I would mention to wait, to look, to slow down, to process, whether verbally or personally through journaling, and allow our lament to be spoken. See, a lot of times when we experience lament, we want to do something because we feel so out of control. And that's why I say wait. And that's awful advice. I don't think anybody would say, "Oh, great, I've got a nail in my arm. I'll just wait." I think that's a good idea, rather than take it out. But to wait, to look around. It's amazing what we see when we actually look. I do groups with students all the time. I've been doing groups for 40 years in my counseling practice. And there are so many times that we're in this state, and whether it's figuratively or literally, we look down and look away. We don't look into other people's eyes. We don't look at the world around us at all. And ironically, sometimes I have to actually instruct people to say, look up, look. What do you see in people's faces as you've told your story? And so many times with confusion, they say, they look concerned. It's like, yeah, you're right. They are. They are. And just slow down. Take some time to process. We probably can take some more time to talk about what it looks like to process, because that word is kind of kicked around, but again, we don't really define our terms very well, and allow our lament to be spoken. And that's the key points of it. So going back to my question, as I go into the what I'm referring to as kind of Q&A time. But this is the question I want to leave you with, because I have heard from reliable sources that once I start talking about end-of-program reminders, I might as well say, see you later, catch you later, you know the rest, and whatever. So I'll leave you with this question, and that is, when you think of lament, what do you think of? And hit us up on Instagram, post it there, what you think of when you think of lament, and what feelings come to mind when you think of lament. I'd love to hear it. It'd be part of the conversation, the bigger conversation that we can have about this. I think it is a central part of us owning our own humanity, which we have summarily condemned because it reminds us of something we really don't like. So the second thing, Q&A, I had somebody ask me something about the podcast and last time about emptiness, and basically the question boiled down to a kind of a clarification that I wanted to make. But the person asked about, or basically made the statement, look, when I hear emptiness, I hear hopelessness. And I can't possibly deal with those two things at the same time. I just can't. It's just too much. And I couldn't agree more. But the clarification I would add to that question is that I don't see emptiness and hopelessness as the same thing. Now, can emptiness lead to hopelessness? Yeah, sure, it can. Absolutely. As a matter of fact, it could be such an automatic connection of feeling empty and then feeling hopeless that we've just managed to link the two of them together, and when one comes, the other comes. But hopelessness oftentimes rests on a search for something that would give me some measure of assurance that whatever state I'm in won't last. And when I hope less, just divide it up, I end up saying, this is never going to go away, and I am now hopeless. I don't have any way of building some sense of endurance or some sense of maybe this will be over soon or whatever that might be. Because hope is built on some kind of expectation. Just give me some hope. In other words, what can I expect? And if somebody says, well, this will be over soon, then I build my hope on that, right? But what happens when it doesn't get over soon? We don't ever define soon, of course. What happens when it doesn't? Then I'm back to the same old problem again. So I would encourage us to decouple emptiness from hopelessness. I know that's easier said than done. I understand that. That might be a bigger conversation we have to have. But emptiness is not a state of condemnation. Emptiness is oftentimes a result or a byproduct of not building internally the kinds of substance that we need to accept what is perhaps available to us to get through whatever is next. And that may be a day, that may be an hour, that may be any number of things. But the essence of what I was talking about in the last podcast about emptiness is all that it drives us to do so that we won't feel hopeless. And if we were to sit back and allow the emptiness to exist without trying to fix it. See, a lot of our strategies are the very thing that perpetuate and even accentuate our sense of hopelessness. And it never really occurs to us to lean into this thing called emptiness and allow it to exist, dare I say, accept that it exists, and then perhaps lean further into other relationships and other things like that. Not to dispel the emptiness, but to find other people that say, yeah, me too. I get it. I know what that feels like. So let's walk this journey together, struggling with the sense of emptiness we have, and learn ways that we can begin to rebuild the internal emptiness we have, so that we don't look to have people medicate it for us, but we can begin to learn and take and live out of the overflow. And that's, I asked that in the last one, are you a ditch or a reservoir? Because in a lot of cases, our hearts are just ditches. Water flows in and water flows out. And we do very little to take care of the well that is the imagery of our hearts, to take care of that so that it's not getting dumped in and poison's getting thrown into it and trash gets thrown into it, and then it just flows downstream and affects everything downstream, otherwise known as my life and relationships and so forth. So it was an outstanding question. I changed it a little, and I can get back to it easy enough when we're talking about it another time and understand it. So we are to that point in the program, in the podcast. DM me your messages. DM me. We're going to put a place on Instagram if you want to comment. What do you think of when you hear the word lament? And based on what you've heard tonight, maybe your perspective has changed a little bit. But add that in there too. Are there other questions that come out of what I've been talking about with the whole idea, if you will, of lament? So DM your questions to us on Instagram, and I will certainly include it like I did this last one. I will continue to address it as we go along. So do that. You can subscribe or follow on the website at drmitch.com. You can follow us on Instagram at the Psych Monologues, Facebook, Ray.Mitch, and LinkedIn, drmitch. Any one of those places you can follow along. New content will show up and allow you to do that. You can also follow the podcast itself. Wherever you consume and listen to your podcasts, you can probably find us. We are on, I'm on Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, Podbean, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, any of those outlets. There are probably others that it's being kind of pushed out to. The other big announcement I wanted to mention to you, and I will probably put it at the front end of the next one so you know, but we have opened up the page for blog posts that we have. And we will be adding some more to. We will be adding some more to it. But I have a outstanding new writer who's initiating and inaugurating the reopening of the blog, and he wrote a blog that I would encourage you to read. It's worth a read. It's called The Confessions of a Nihilist. He's the resident philosopher, if you will. And there will be other blog posts that come along, hopefully, to encourage and to challenge and to provide thought-provoking material that we can put on the website for you to do that. So whenever you're subscribing on the website in the contact, stay in contact or touch with us, you'll probably get notified that something new has been put up on the blog or on the website for you. If you're interested in partnering with us, I continue to want to build our scholarship fund to be able to send students for a nominal fee to be part of our silent retreats, which is kind of the outgrowth of what we're doing in the larger picture with the podcast and some other things that we'll be rolling out as time goes along. So if you're interested in partnering with us to continue to grow the scholarship fund, by your tax-deductible gift, or you know somebody who's passionate about spiritual formation for this generation of believers walking into life, then please do so. You can do that at our donate button at the bottom of the page for the silent retreats on the website. Drop-down menu to CCU, drop down to the silent retreats. There's a donation link at the bottom down there that you can use to donate. You can donate on a monthly basis, or you can donate just a single gift. All of it, I am immensely grateful and humbled by your trust of what we're trying to do here at the psych monologues and like I said, some other ideas that are floating around for us to be able to build and raise funds to support the ministry at large. If you'd rather donate through a check, you can do that as well. Just make the check out to 1615.tv. That is our financial partner that allows us to offer tax-deductible gifts. Put that same address on your envelope as you send it, and send it to P.O. Box 1777, Castle Rock, Colorado 80104. So 1615.tv, P.O. Box 1777, Castle Rock, Colorado 80104 for a physical check. You're more than welcome to do so, and you can send it to that address, and we will send you a receipt and be ever so grateful to continue to build our scholarship fund. Well, that's it for tonight. Thank you so much for your kind attention and time set aside to continue to walk through some of the key issues that are related to our spiritual journey, our psychological connectedness within that journey, and also just our faith and building our faith to become more and more Christ-like in how we think, how we relate, and who we are. That's it for tonight. Love ya. Later. Bye.